Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to NPU Live. I'm Keri Rodriguez, and I am so excited to welcome our guest, a very special guest from the West Coast, Dr. Travis Bristol. Travis, how are you?
I am well. I'm well. Thank you, Keri, for having me on.
You look like you, and you sound so peaceful.
Oh,
But you are
I just had a great lunch. I had a great lunch.
You are well fed, well rested, and it sounds like everybody's quiet in the house. Are you just having a moment of zen, or what's going on?
I told them not to come in. Yeah, so the kids know, but they may come at some point. But yes, I'm well.
Well, you are an incredible mind, a leader in education, a leader in equity, and just an extraordinary person overall. And I want to give you a little time to kind of tell your story so we know a little bit about you, but I also want to know, how you're making it through the pandemic. So let's start with Dr. Bristol. So can you kind of take us through your story and how you came to be this extraordinary leader in education?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'll accept that amidst the parenting madness. But very quickly, I was born and raised in East New York, Brooklyn, which is East New York. For some context, when people think about Brooklyn, they think about this sort of gentrifying space. East New York and Bushwick, East New York and probably Brownsville are probably one of the two sections of Brooklyn that have not gentrified. So in many ways, Brooklyn, where I grew up, it feels very much like then and now, if you will. So
even just 10 years, even from when you grew up. I mean, I shut down some streets in Brooklyn with Sharpton maybe 10 years ago, or maybe 7 years ago, and it's changed so much. So.
Yes. And I would say that East New York, Brooklyn is probably one of the places that has not come into the good of that quote unquote gentrification. There are bike lanes, however, in East New York. So primarily the community that I grew up in was primarily Black and brown. When I was in elementary school, I attended a private religious school, which in many ways what I would describe as Afrocentric now, that really created in many ways, I point to that early experience when all of my teachers were Black. I learned about Crispus Attucks and Frederick Douglass in like the first grade, writing to Nelson Mandela. I mean, all those experiences were really helpful for me in creating a positive sense of self. So that was my early experience. And then, life became expensive. I was reared by a single mother. She subsequently had two other kids. And so I could no longer attend private school in my community. And so I went to a public school. Both my middle and high school, both public schools actually no longer exist because they were closed. And those schools were traumatic experiences in many ways. This is not a public-private charter discussion, but I'm just talking about my own experience in places that were really harmful and did not prepare me for success. After attending those two different schools, I went to a small liberal arts college in Massachusetts. I went to Amherst College, one day I was waiting to speak to a professor, and I saw this advertisement for a scholarship from the Rockefeller Brothers Fund Foundation to give folks money to attend, to get a master's in teaching. And so I thought, hey, if someone's giving me some money to go to, to get a master's, why not? So I did a master's at Stanford, came back home to New York City. I taught for 5 years at two different New York City public schools. I started a doctoral program, and I spent 3 years while doing my doctoral program training teachers with the Boston Teacher Residency Program. So I've spent time both teaching students and teaching teachers. And so that's really central to how I see the world and how I want to use my research to improve both teaching and learning for students and teachers. I spent 2 years as an assistant professor at Boston University. This is now my second year. I'm on the faculty at UC Berkeley's Graduate School of Education. And much of my research looks at how to improve the school working conditions for teachers of color.
It's extraordinary just to follow your career path. And you and I are friends on Facebook and through the education space, and to watch your travels
Yeah.
and the people that you touch and the conversations that you have and the eyes you open, the doors you open. Your work is really transformative. So it's a blessing to be able to witness your leadership and watch people evolve and respond to you. So that's why, I enjoy watching this. But I want to know Travis the man right now. You are a man who travels, who speaks, who has connections directly with people, being an educator, and being an educator of educators. And you're a man on planes too. Boy, do you ever move. How has this situation changed the way you see your work? Has it evolved, and how has it impacted you to stay in one place and to try to find connection through things like Zoom and picking up the phone? Has it changed?
It's actually been very healing in some ways. I once upon a time, I thought I'd become a policymaker. But I became really attracted to doing research because in my head, I thought that I could sit in a quiet office and just do my work and not have to interact with people. And one of the things I quickly realized was that if I was actually going to get people to take up my ideas, I actually had to engage with those people. It's not naturally how I would like to live my life in terms of, lots of this public-facing work. But I found it to be a part of pushing my research and shaping policy and practice. So I've actually enjoyed, like the Travis me has actually enjoyed not having to get on a plane and to sleep in, these things are blessings, right? I recognize I've been extraordinarily blessed to even have these opportunities to do this work. And I think that that kind of work has come at a deep cost because getting on, who wants to wake up at 6 a.m. to catch a flight, and I also have a family, young family. And so what this pandemic has done in many ways is really helped me really sort of like actually reevaluate if there are other mechanisms and mediums, right, to continue to shape policy and practice without having to jump on a plane and sit in a nondescript hotel room, because that I did not enjoy.
So I want to double click on something that you said earlier and what you said just now about shaping policy and practice, because you're actually doing that in your own home.
Yeah.
We all
That's true.
But taking you back to, and I wanted to get you to tell your personal story, because the way I've heard you've done it in the past is just talking about that early introduction to Black excellence through that private school experience. And frankly, in the conversations we've been having with parent activists across the country, they are looking at this moment as their opportunity to introduce, in some places, an Afrocentric curriculum, because they can kind of cultivate and curate what they want their children to learn in this moment. Although, we are getting some guidance from districts, if you're lucky. If not, there are other resources that we are introducing them to. But there's also the ability for us as parents to introduce our children to education concepts, a cultural education concepts and experiences now as the curators of what curriculum looks like in our own home. So I want to ask you if you have taken advantage of that in your own home. You probably do it naturally, just given your own lens, but how are you approaching this with your own kids? How has it gone?
So so I think that I have, because of the nature of my work and my own training, I have had to, my initial response when, trying to, I should, for some context, I have a 12-year-old and an 8-year-old. My 12-year-old attends an independent school, and my son, my daughter attends a public school. And so, for my son's independent school, I feel like they have more or less figured this out. They've been responsive because we're paying them, I think, in some ways, right? So they feel like they have to deliver a product. For my daughter, it's been challenging, to say the least. Her teacher, who is, I think, on average well-meaning, has had has spent several weeks trying to figure out the technology. My wife and I have spent several, the first couple of weeks, and even now, I think they've gotten somewhat better trying to click through all these Google Classroom, and it's been maddening and frustrating. So because I study schools and systems, I know that what I initially felt was, oh my gosh, I'm a bad parent, right? Because I can't even now, it's just, I have not that this means much, but I think, my wife is also a faculty member. She has a doctoral degree. I have a doctoral degree. We've taught, and so and we found it very frustrating to try to navigate all these Google Classroom pages and logins. But because of my professional work of studying schools and school systems, I know that when teachers aren't doing their best, it's on average less about the teacher, more about the conditions created to support high quality teaching. Mm-hmm. So I've had to somehow sort of remind myself, and it's only because of my professional training, that I'm not a bad parent, because in some of the earlier days I was like, oh my gosh, I felt like a bad parent. But I think to your question about how I'm navigating it, I mean, honestly, we don't do all of the assignments because it's, it's well-intentioned busy work, if you will. So some of the things that we've done with our daughter is one thing I'm excited about is that we've started having her interview her grandparents. So to understand about what life was like for them, I'm a first generation American, as is my wife. So we've asked my daughter to interview her respective grandmothers about what life was like growing up in a different country when they were 8 years old, and having her write a project. And I'll have her do the same thing with her respective grandfathers. She does a lot of cooking. We do lots of walks. So I think that we have tried, and we do walks because we live in a community and space where we can go outside and walk, and social distance isn't an issue. And so I recognize that class privilege there. But that's how we've tried to manage. We've acknowledged that the adults, I know that the adults don't know what they're doing because they've never experienced this. They've never flown this ship or flown this plane in these kinds of conditions. And so I have resolved within myself that I can do, that it's okay to just do what I think my daughter needs best. And that is connecting with her grandparents, learning about her culture, getting outside, learning different recipes. So those are the things that we've tried to do, recognizing that schools currently are not do not have the capacity to really create conditions for high quality learning.
Travis, I think this is so important for parents to hear right now. Because I know you know this, but so many policy makers, so many elected officials, so many well-intentioned principals and teachers and support staff, they don't truly understand the context of parents right now. If you're fortunate enough to have a job, most likely we're the essential worker. We're the ones who are out there exposing ourselves so folks can get groceries, or you can pick up your medications, or we're taking care of your grandmother, or we're picking up your trash, if you're lucky enough to keep your job. Some of us have just lost our jobs and are spending 8.5 hours on the telephone trying to file, and at the end of the day not being able to get it done because the websites are crashing. Or if we do have a job that we can do at home, we are scared to death about keeping that job, because in the best of times, pre-COVID-19, we are in the struggle, trying to hold on to housing, trying to make sure we have enough food to eat, keeping our babies safe in the neighborhood. And now we are thrown into chaos. Some of us had already been living in chaos, and now is just compounded. And we're in pressure cooker situations. So now you add to the mix a whole new level of expectation with a whole group of people that many of us have felt didn't like us very much in the first place. And now we must engage in a whole new level. You know, one of the most important things that we have been having a conversation about in the parent community is that, you know, racism didn't evaporate because the pandemic came. You know, the terrible relationships and the lack of parent engagement between educators and students or schools and families, that's something that's been long-standing, the erosion of that relationship, the lack of trust, and it didn't just evaporate. And now suddenly parents are thrust into a situation where we must step up and do the best that we can to become educators. And we're not, you know, that expectation that suddenly you're going to turn a parent into a teacher, a living room into a classroom, it's not a thing, you know, and the idea that that's going to happen and we're going to be able to stop any learning loss and all of this, you know, I think a lot of us are feeling terrible. We're panicked. We're afraid, you know, we are fighting to get our kids equitable access to high quality education because we don't want them to struggle the way that many of us have had to struggle. And now you see that slipping away, you know, and trying to hold on to any hope of what you can do to make sure that they're not going to be left behind. But the idea that, you know, we're doing this and we're the only parents in this struggle is even more heartbreaking. So frankly, it's been refreshing to have folks, you know, and not to make light of your situation, but folks that, you know, a two-parent household with 2 PhDs, that's nothing to sneeze about. But the fact that you know, we have, you know, very similar struggle, that not everything is probably going perfectly for you, the way it's like your kids probably aren't any better at sitting down and doing their work all the time than my babies are.
No, my daughter spends lots of time on TV playing video games. She's probably, I'm sure she's playing Fortnite right now as we speak.
And she's not reading War and Peace, you know, that's not.
Playing Fortnite with her friend. I'm pretty sure if I got up, she'd be playing Fortnite. And it's and the school day is not over yet. But you know, whatever, it's fine.
Yeah. So
I mean, it's not fine, but it is what it is.
So could you talk for a minute just to parents right now, like how panicked should we be in this moment? The idea that for many of us, you know, we're losing 6 months here, you know, before we can get back to school, before our kids will re-enter a classroom, whatever that's going to look like. We're hopeful that educators across the country are trying their best to come up with the world-class plans to help to mitigate this learning loss in this regression we're seeing. Is that what you're seeing, and what would you say to them?
To parents in this moment? Yeah, I mean, I shouldn't say that. I mean, I am worried. I mean, I think that my daughter has a teacher who I have had because of my probably class and education privilege, I've had very frank conversations with this teacher about the clear discriminatory practices that she was enacting on my daughter, who was Black, and another Black boy. And what that has meant is not being pushed academically in that class. So I am worried that there is some quote unquote, that there will be some learning loss. And I also know that, and I'm also worried that I probably don't have all of the skills to support her. And I know that you're probably wanting some message of hope, which
I want a message of honesty.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I mean, I would say that, yeah, I mean, clearly I am worried. And I know that there are things that I can do, right? So for example, we do try to set aside some time for her to read, right? And so I think that at the minimum, we are getting her to read for, I don't know, 20 minutes a day-ish. 20 minutes-ish a day. And so I'm just focusing on, maybe some reading and some math. But yeah, I mean, I think that this is going to be uncharted territory. I suspect that, I mean, the honest to God truth is that that this pandemic will only heighten inequality in this country between those who have been historically at the margins, because I'm home every day, and so I can continue to work with my daughter in small ways when there may be some who cannot. So I think there is cause for worry, and what I'm hoping is that with organizations like the National Parents Union, that there might be some real advocacy that that in these summer months and when school begins, that there will be necessary resources to in the form of online tutors or supports to address the loss. But I think it's important that parents recognize that this issue is a systems issue, and we need organizations like yours to advocate on their behalf, because it would be wrong, honestly, to believe and to expect parents to teach a third grader reading and writing. I mean, those are, like, I spent many years training teachers, right? Like, I've trained high school teachers. And so there's some work around I could support, like a high school student, but some of my skill set of understanding the complexity around elementary reading and writing and math, that's beyond my own training. And so I will need to advocate for for policies that allow for tutors or some type of support to fill this loss. So I think, one, there is a sense of I recognize that I don't have the capacity, and my hope is, although hope is not a strategy, that there might be some true advocacy work to provide children ongoing support in some meaningful way.
Here's what my biggest fear is, as an activist, as a leader, as a mama. Right now, the phenomenon of the belief gap, the fact that we have educators that fundamentally do not believe our children are capable of proficiency, let alone excellence, leading many of our classrooms right now. The fact that, for so many, they believe that, our kids are by virtue of being Black or brown are automatically broken. We see that in pre-COVID times. Yeah. I'm concerned and frankly fired up to find out, what are the best ways to advocate around disrupting a mindset once we return, that our kids now are so profoundly broken that we are going to lose a generation of kids that have been so traumatized. We hear the trauma of poverty, every excuse in the world why our talented babies are so broken that they should not even be able to have, proximity to opportunity, because, they'd never know what to do with it anyway. I'm concerned about, the perpetuation of this, on steroids, now that, oh gosh, well, there's never any way we're going to be able to catch them up. And that belief gap is just going to continue to grow. So as an advocate, I want to be able to fight to disrupt that mindset that our children, that they were already deemed to have been, not capable just by virtue of being poor, Black, or brown, won't be able to, once they re-enter, catch up, learn, be capable of excellence, all of that. So like as all of those things that I am, and first and foremost as a mama, I'm very worried about what we may be walking into once the doors reopen. How do you see it?
Yeah. So, yes, I think that um, that you will have teachers coming in to returning back to schools believing that it was poor Black and brown parents who did not adequately give their children work. But what I'm also hoping is that at least in a very small, a small N of one, as I think about my daughter's teacher, and I suspect, and I know this is true of many teachers across the country, that they are confronting, that they are realizing that they too, that their failure to teach, right, is not because it's something about them, but it's about that there weren't conditions created or set up to support them to teach in this virtual way, right? That there hasn't been adequate preparation. And so what I'm hoping is that some researcher or some advocacy group, right, makes the connection that when children aren't learning, it's not necessarily because it's something about the child, just like when you, the teacher, right, couldn't enact high quality teaching in this virtual way. It wasn't something about you, but it was something about the conditions that were created that were not supporting you. And so I'm hoping that there is this link that teachers, when they come back in the fall or the middle of the fall, that when they see that their students are quote unquote struggling, that they recognize that the failure is not necessarily with the students, but with the conditions that those teachers have created. And I think that this is also an opportunity to continue to push a research or policy and practice agenda around increasing the ethno-racial diversity of the teacher workforce. I've had two family members and one close friend die of COVID in New York City. In the state of California, about 44% of the current cases of COVID are Latinx folks. That this disease, this virus, I should say, is disproportionately killed Black and brown people, and we all know someone, right? And so we've all been, and so I know what it's like to the social and emotional tax as a person of color, right? Of what it means to be sort of connected to this pandemic. And so I think that becomes a really important opportunity to say that if we're going to think about which teachers are most ripe to teach our students, it's those teachers that have at least had some connection, has felt some pain to this pandemic. And that has been disproportionately Black and Latinx teachers, or Latinx people, people who have been historically placed at the margins. And coupled with that experience, there is clear and convincing research, of which I've published on, that there is this quote unquote added value for Latinx students and Black students if they have a Latinx or Black teacher. And so I think that both having this subgroup of individuals who've had some connection, deep, painful connection to this pandemic, and understand the psychic and the social emotional costs, those are the kinds of teachers that we want to help students transition back into school, because it will be those teachers who can hold and understand the pain because they have experienced the pain themselves. And so I would hope that in this moment that we don't lose sight of the importance of continuing to diversify or to ethno-racially diversify the teacher workforce.
Yeah, Dr. Bristol, I gotta say, it's been your work around teacher diversity and the information and the resources that you've provided. I know that you provide them for teachers and for educators, but we have hijacked your resources for our advocacy efforts here because we have come to learn how important it is. We knew anecdotally, we could feel in our hearts that our babies need to see themselves reflected in classroom leadership because it makes a difference. We didn't know why it made a difference. We didn't know how it made a difference, but we knew in our hearts that it made a difference. And you kind of opened that door for us to take our feelings and turn them into power through data. and how important that was.
Yeah.
So we have embraced that, here in Massachusetts, and as well as, passing that information to folks across the country through our network of parent advocacy, over 200 strong, different organizations in all 50 states, Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico, sharing that message, that we stole from your work for teachers, so we hijacked it for parents. So we know how important that is. And I think that message that you're bringing to us right now about better understanding, it's about people who have been that close to the pain, being able to form those incredible bonds with our children. It's like unspoken, but it can be spoken to, and how important both of those things are. So what else? What else do we as parents, we know we need diverse educators and people who understand our pain and our context firsthand in the classroom. What else do we need to be really focused on, in the coming months to best prepare these systems to help our children get back on track?
I do hope that this also provides an opportunity for understanding and for really including, not in sort of a perfunctory or way, parents at the decision-making table. I mean, I think that if we were to design curriculum, so if we were to spend some time designing curriculum that meaningfully engage students, it might be something like what I'm doing with my daughter, right? Like that curriculum should be talking to your grandparents to understand how you got here, how your experience might be different from theirs. And I think that understanding the importance of learning a particular recipe that's been passed down, walking around your community to have some sense around your own lived experience, right? Your marginalization or your privilege. But I think that what I'm hoping that happens when we return in the fall or right now is that policymakers are actually inviting parents to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. Whereas it's these parents who just can't figure out how to click all these Google, right? That they're actually intentionally involved in designing or redesigning what teaching and learning could look like in this post-pandemic world. And that might mean, and that should mean, getting a sense of how can we incorporate students' lived experiences. And the only way that you can do that is by asking the people who have reared these children. And so what I'm doing now in my own house, I'm hoping, right, that the superintendent, right, invites me into, or folks like me, right, who are thinking about other ways of teaching and learning to the table, because clearly their teachers have not done this work, and this pandemic has allowed me to actually give me space and time to create these kinds of learning opportunities for my daughter. And so I'm hoping that that this kind of engagement, and I think that historically people have just said we just need to check a box and have parents, right? But I don't think that people have really, I mean, clearly I know that this is the nature of your work. But I think that even in my own work, right? Even in my own work, I rarely, this has been I think a self-critique of my own work, that I spend a lot of time talking to teachers, some to students, but not enough to parents and families. And I think that this presents a real opportunity now to really find meaningful ways to engage parents in the research practice and policy efforts moving forward.
I think I've even teased you a couple of times saying, where are the parents in here? Where are the families, Travis? Where did you But no, I think it's encouraging to hear, someone who's leading work at your level, really digging into that and thinking thoughtfully about that context. And I'm hopeful, here in Massachusetts, we have been engaged by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to be a part of their task force about post-COVID-19 education is going to look like.
Because, really?
Oh, yes, because frankly, well, I think part of it is because we have fought so damn hard. And they know we are going to be there holding them accountable. And that has been a piece of the work is fighting for that place at the table. Because if they won't give it to us and you're not going to include us in the room, I am going to be looking over every single piece of what you're putting out. And if it doesn't work, and if it's not inclusive, and if it's not intersectional, and it's not translated and everything, I'm going to hold Jeff or anybody else's feet to the fire, because that is what we've had to do to get that respect and be taken seriously here.
Yeah.
And, you know, in a place, it's kind of crazy when you think about it, how we go through this education exercise, and how there's a bunch of folks who I think are very well-meaning sitting around the table developing policies that they're just going to do to our children and do to us and disrupt our, like, even the idea, like, there are some concepts, I know in California you're hearing about this 2-day, 3-day school schedules, rotating classrooms, like whether or not we need to have flex grades and half grades, all of this stuff that, you know, without us, without folks fighting to be at that table so that we're included in the decision, you know, they're just going to dictate, you know, what they've decided is going to be okay. And it's been stunning, you know, this, and I've only been in this education space, you know, for about 5 or 6 years now, you know, and I come to this as a union organizer, a political activist who just happened to have a baby who had special needs and said, oh my God, my people are not organized. Are you kidding me? This can't be right that I don't have a voice here.
Yeah.
But it is, you know, I am very hopeful that as we, you know, start to have these conversations, and we're seeing them, frankly, in Detroit, I'm seeing it in California where parents are starting to be engaged, in Tennessee, in Florida, in Oklahoma, where parents are really claiming their seat at the table and pushing back and raising holy hell if they're not being engaged. But one of the things that we're going to be looking at is assessment, and when these schools reopen, determining where our kids are, how bad the learning loss has been, and what supports they're going to need. And one of the things we're talking about is, you know, really taking a look at some of the lessons learned from special education, some of the evaluation processes where parents are naturally asked to provide their own assessment, and that we are developing individual education plans for our children out of necessity and their special needs, whether or not, you know, that's something that we need to take a look at for every child reentering public education, where they are and what they need, and how do we change, you know, assessment and evaluation to include what we as parents who have been, you know, the primary educators over this period of time have to offer the knowledge, the data we have, having witnessed what our kids are capable of at home. How do you see that playing out? Do you think that that's a possibility?
So, I mean, I should say that the special education domain is not my field of research. I've always said that every child in America deserves an individualized education plan. That should be a fundamental right of engaging in public education. And so, having sat in as a classroom teacher on IEP meetings, I have found them to be actually really informative, that I got to understand more. You know, it's kind of like when you go to the doctor for the first time, they do this sort of like family history. Like, I found those to be really helpful in putting the student in sort of a larger context. So I'm not going to dodge your question about assessment, but or maybe I will, but I think what I will say is that I think that every child in America deserves an individualized education plan, and I think that is a great policy recommendation, that all children re-entering school, right, will have some individualized time to reflect on what happened during this, during this moment, and how that might shape their engagement with school, and how schools might need to shape how they engage with students moving forward. So I think that IEP idea should be incorporated, should be a right for every single child in public schools.
Dr. Bristol, thank you so much for being with us and being generous with your time. I am just such a super fan of your work, but also of you as a human being and your generosity with those of us that are learning from your beautiful mind. So I can't wait to see what's next for you and following your leadership in this space. But when you need parents call on us. We have thousands and thousands of families that we're connected to, hundreds of organizations, and we want to be partners in this work. We have so much at stake, and we're willing to learn. We might not know the jargon, but we bring something really special to this: the inspiration, the fire, the passion, and we want to lift you up and advocate for the things that you're finding work for our kids. So we're so grateful to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Keri.
Dr. Travis Bristol, he's an assistant professor of education at the University of California, Berkeley, former professor from around my stomping grounds here in Massachusetts, and just an awesome human being. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Keri.
All right, so much more to come on NPU Live. Stay with us.